Hello and welcome to our Monticello live stream. I'm Melanie Boyer, the Manager of Digital Media and Strategy, joined by my Monticello colleague, Crystal Gladden, Manager of School Programs, as well as three teachers from our Monticello Teacher Institute. We're going to be talking today about the Monticello Teacher Institute, which is a week-long fellowship for teachers where they get to come on site and take tours and talk to scholars and do research on a topic of their choice. We've been doing educational programs like this at Monticello since 2004, actually even before that in a different iteration. And we're really excited to have a chance to talk to teachers who've just finished, some of them last Friday, this program here at Monticello. So we are joined by Kirsten, Joanne, and Stephen. And let's just get started with some questions. Oh, and audience at home, if you have any questions for us, please leave them in the comments and we'll be happy to answer them. So teachers, how did y'all hear about the Monticello Teacher Institute? Just jump on in.
Yeah, I can start. So I have been just really interested in history my whole life, and particularly Thomas Jefferson, which I know you know, Melanie, already, that I just had this, I don't know, this infatuation with him and his thinking and his life. And so I just was tinkering around on the Monticello website, pulling resources, pulling quotes, and then I saw the educator resources tab and I was like, they let teachers come there. So it was just through really just like serendipity and curiosity, just found it and was like, I have to do that. And so I did.
So for me, in 2018, I went to the White House Historical Association Teacher Institute, and every night we kind of have dinner, and you're talking to other teachers, and you start networking. And so you start talking like, "Hey, where have you gone? What have you done? What's good?" She kind of create like go, go. One of the ones that was highly recommended was the Monticello Teacher Institute. From one of the other teachers who had previously gone. So I was like, all right, I need to file that away and apply for that one day. And then with all the COVID stuff that happened for a couple of years, those plans kind of got put on hold. But when I saw things open back up this year, I was like, I need to jump on that and take advantage of that opportunity.
And that's what we hear from a lot of teachers, word of mouth, really. Teachers who attend other institutes. We're not the only institution that does this. Kirsten, did you want to add anything?
I would just say I was a frequent visitor to the website prior to, and the quality of what I saw in terms of the lessons and the resources for teachers. And then I noticed the same thing. It was like, there's a program for us. And I applied and crossed my fingers and had a great week.
And we are, again, had a great week with you all as two of the co-hosts, co-collaborators for the program, and the conversations were absolutely amazing. So what, after you actually got to the website or heard through word of mouth that there was this program, what really prompted you to go ahead and send that application in?
For me personally, I think I had a sense of discouragement in teaching and education kind of post-COVID. I felt like I needed something new, something fresh. And I wanted to experience something that helped kind of ignite what I wanted to do for my students.
Awesome.
For me, I think it was the opportunity to also learn from other teachers from across the country. As teachers, it's kind of easy to get stuck into little bubbles in your community or your state. And to me, one of the great benefits is getting to hear ideas from teachers across the country. Kirsten's in Ohio, the other teachers from California, from all over the country. And so kind of be able to get to know those people and then look at these resources that you got at places like Monticello as a group, because sometimes they see things that I don't see, or I see things they don't see based on what level of school that we're teaching, what type of school we're in. So I think having those types of conversations really benefits me as a teacher, kind of get me out of that bubble that I exist in a lot of times.
I echo that answer. So like everywhere I've taught history, I've been like the sole history teacher, like teaching 5th through 8th grade, writing and developing the curriculum myself. So being able to be in a room with other people who share that passion, because it's kind of hard to find somebody and when you're the only history teacher around who cares and who finds it interesting. So I was like, that's going to be very inspiring. And there's something about, we talked a lot in my week about the power of place. Like if that was something virtual or something I could read and develop, it wouldn't have been the same. There's something very inspiring about being on those grounds, which I talked a lot about during my week, but something very inspiring being there and just reminding yourself this is where a lot of people lived and a lot of history happened. So I just like, I have to get there.
And we've heard that from quite a few educators in many other places about wanting to have that moment to be refreshed and think back about the conversations, the resources, and educating your students and pouring that knowledge into them. So that's been a fantastic experience for us to engage with you all as you're getting renewed and getting new ideas.
And it refreshes us too. Like as museum professionals, we sometimes don't get to engage with this content and just this enthusiasm as much as we do for these 2 weeks. I think I can speak for all of us who lead the program that it's really invigorating and fun for us. We learn as much as y'all learn from us. So
I kind of joke with some of my friends. It's kind of like history dork camp.
Yes.
Because you get to hang out with other people that like what you're doing. It's like a lot of times I go to
Right.
historical sites and everybody's, let's run through this real quick and go on to Six Flags or Disney World, wherever we're going. And I want to stop and I want to look at the things. I want to read the things and talk about the things. And nobody else wants to do those things with me. So when
we're
you're
here with
like,
you. We're here with you,
right.
Stephen.
So when you're with a group that, also likes those things, it's a lot more enjoyable. And I think you get a lot more out of that experience than sometimes you might ordinarily.
No, I love it. And are asking those questions.
Sorry, Crystal. So let's switch and talk about the week a little bit. Can y'all tell the audience a little bit about some of the activities that you did here at Monticello? Just kind of talking through some of the things we did during the week.
I'll start.
Yeah, start.
The one thing that really stuck out was the roundtables with the scholars and how much information was imparted in such a small amount of time. And it was great because there was a great direction given with who you should sit and speak with. And I spent some time with Mr. Looney, and he was a walking, I don't even know. He's not even an encyclopedia. He's beyond that. Anything Jefferson you wanted to know, he could tell you exactly when it happened and perhaps in what letter it even happened in.
And what line of that letter.
And by the way, you may need to make sure you check this one out too, to make sure you fully understand this one as well. I mean, it was really, I could have talked to him for days on end and probably still not even touched the surface of his knowledge. But he really helped me kind of formulate my project and what I wanted to do as my project. And he gave me a lot of things to think about. He challenged some of my thoughts, which was great. I appreciate that because it gets you to think more about what you're doing. But the roundtables were pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I have to build on that because I had a very similar experience with the same person. And what he did for me is I felt like he talked to me the way I talk to my students. So I feel like sometimes I can get very lost and fixated on my own thing. And if the student gets fixated, I would push them with questions. And he pushed me with the question, what's your evidence for that? Which is exactly what I would have asked the student.
Right.
And I stopped and said, it's my own personal opinion. I have no evidence. Help me. And so he directed me, like I said, to this letter written in this month to this person. It's probably on line 66.
Yeah.
Okay. And
you became the student very quickly.
Have that to get pushed on perspective and to remind myself that I could go down my own little rabbit hole, but I'm not checking myself. And I remember calling my family that night and saying, in a room full of average people, I probably know way more about Thomas Jefferson than anybody. So I have never felt more ill-informed on him than after speaking with those scholars. It was fascinating and really motivating.
For me, I really enjoyed some of the tours on the grounds. Like I'm not super knowledgeable about trees or flowers, But listening to those experts at Monticello talk about those things and what worked and what didn't, and how these different plants interacted, and then about the enslaved people that maintain those, and doing the Slavery to Freedom tour, thinking about like how would life have been. A lot of times thinking about Monticello, it was obviously Thomas Jefferson's home, but it was a community of people. There's children living there, there's enslaved people living there. How these people interact with one another, and what was daily life like for people there. So those aren't the type of things that usually show up in a history textbook. But I think students are fascinated by those things. They want to see themselves in history. What were the kids doing at Monticello? What kind of things did they eat? And what kind of things did they make and play with? Those things were really interesting to me, and things that I've been able to take home and talk to my own children about.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, I feel like just the copious amounts of information that's there. We were there for an entire week. We got a chance to explore on our own, to do guided tours, to talk to these scholars, to collaborate with each other. And on our final day of presentations, we all got to pick a spot, which we all, to present our project. And one of my colleagues, we went to a spot that I hadn't even been to, and I'd been there for 5 days already, but there was so much to see there. It's easy to miss something, which I thought was very cool. That like, if you're going to go there with like your family, it's not just like you said, Stephen, it's not just a stop by trip, like a pass by. It's like a stay in for a while. You could probably do 2 full days there as a vacation. But for me as a learner, there's still so much I haven't even seen and been able to absorb, because there's just so much there.
It's that power of place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the private tour of the home was really amazing too. Again, going to the second and third floors that usually don't get to see on a public tour, and getting to do that with a Monticello expert, I think was a pretty special opportunity to kind of imagine what life was like inside that home. Like seeing like I guess they said it was like a futon, basically the little hallway bed that the guests would have stayed in, and the little closets that and attics that people would go hide out in to have some private space. And just seeing those little kind of quirks of the house was also really interesting.
Like the vertical stairs, trying to walk that in heels, I don't recommend.
I did it.
It's not impossible, but
It's not recommended.
It's possible with some confidence.
So even in thinking about the conversations, the experiences, the tours that you've taken, and then the product and the research that you all are doing on your own, what were the focuses of your projects, and what influenced you all to take on the focus of each of your individual projects?
So my project was looking at the issue of separation of church and state. So the state of Kentucky has a long history of conflicts along those lines. So a number of Supreme Court cases have come from Kentucky, things like the 10 Commandments and school prayer. And so that's always been a big topic in my state. And so I was really interested in exploring that further. And then with the more recent Supreme Court cases, with the Coach Praying and Washington State, students are really interested in that topic. And Jefferson obviously had very strong views on religious freedom and the proper relationship between church and state. And his views sometimes conflicted with the other founding fathers on that issue. And so I wanted my students to really be able to see, all right, what was Jefferson's views, because his are cited so frequently, but what was that debate all about within Virginia and in other places in the country? And then how's that applied to our lives today? And where do we draw that line between church and state? Because I don't think that's an issue that's going away anytime soon in our country.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of inspired, kind of like we were saying earlier, about how everyone was from somewhere different. In my institute, we were all 10 of us were from different states, which I thought was very cool. And so I kind of got motivated to make a lesson that could apply across content and across grade levels, but being inspired by the place and by the themes there. And so I focus on this idea of perspective, because one of kind of my favorite things about this country is how different every place is. And I actually ended up driving to Monticello from New Orleans. So I was able to pass through all these different states and really just kind of experience how different every place is and how that's okay. that it's different. And so I wanted to kind of have a lesson on purely perspective, on how our perspective on things can be different based on our experiences, based on what we see, based on, just our values and that power of place where we're from. And so I did a lesson called Perspectives on Monticello, and I based it off of, I don't want to give like spoilers to people who haven't been there, so I'll give a gist. I based it off of the difference between the Highlights Tour and the From Slavery to Freedom Tour, focusing on different views and objects on those tours. But we were asked a lot on those tours to think about it from the perspective, like you said, of Thomas Jefferson himself, of his daughter, the grandchildren, the enslaved people, the enslaved children. And so I kind of picked some, like I said, views and objects from the house, and had, kind of wrote a primary source guide for my students to think about, how this changes their perspective. And I'm not trying to ask them to think anything about it, except for the fact that the way you look at a situation or a place or a person can change if you kind of keep your mind open to it. We're not judging it or placing value on it. It's just, I want them to walk away with that idea that there can be different perspectives, and that is 100% okay.
My focus was on the Declaration. And when I initially started out, it was stemmed from something that happened in my classroom where my kids were trying to reconcile his words versus his actions. So, that was my initial thought. I was going into this, and then I sat down with a scholar who had different ideas for me. And he kind of honed in on my language arts brain a little bit and said, well, why don't you look at the document as an evolution and what contributed to that evolution of that document? And so that's really what I wanted to do. And I found some great primary sources for my kids, and it's a work in progress, and I'm looking at different questions, but I want them to journey through the document, where it started and then where it ended, and figure out what were those contributing factors to all those changes. So, because they need to understand that things don't just happen in a vacuum. It just doesn't appear. There was a process here. So it definitely changed from where I started into where I ended. And I'm really not done yet.
Yeah, and that's something we see a lot with teachers at MTI. They'll come in with one idea. So when teachers apply for this program, they propose a research idea or topic that they want to study. And they can create, we leave it kind of open-ended. So teachers could create a lesson plan or discussion questions. Some have done things like podcasts and video scripts, or, presentations. We even had one teacher last year write a poem and perform it about her experience there. So many times when teachers apply, they have one idea, but then when they get here and start talking to, like Joanne was saying, there's just so much information here and so many people to talk to. A lot of times projects will change. So it sounds like that happened for most of y'all. I don't know about you, Stephen. Maybe you were locked and loaded.
No, I was pretty locked and loaded, but the luncheon with the professors definitely helped, like in terms of finding other sources for extension activities and further exploration and study for students. That lunch they mentioned earlier was not something I was initially looking forward to all that much, but turned out to be pretty amazing.
So I'm going to change this question a little bit. Instead of one of the highlights, what was one thing that was kind of surprising to you about the week, or one experience that was a little surprising or kind of opened your mind a little bit?
I'll start, because this is something I've been thinking about since I got home. The day that we started, when we talked about difficult history and approaching that in the classroom, and then we took the tour from slavery to freedom, I made a huge connection between what we talked about in that classroom in the morning to what we were experiencing on that tour. And to me, it brought some incredible things to light, because you can think of history in a couple different ways, and we talked about this, but I really learned from being on that tour and looking at the enslaved community and walking down Mulberry Row and going into the buildings and learning about daily life, that, history is so human. And it was so powerful to me, because you have to acknowledge that humanity in order to understand it. So to me, that was really kind of one of those moments where I was like, this is what I want to take home. I want to take back to my kids, because they need to understand this. And unfortunately, I can't, transport my kids to Monticello to walk the grounds, but you can definitely a virtual field trip, what have you. But I felt like that to me was probably the most impactful thing that happened when I was there.
Yeah, I don't know if the word is surprising, but it's kind of like you said, like impactful. The thing that's staying with me from it is we were having like a debrief one day and we were talking to one of the directors there, and he said that he felt like his experience had changed over his time there, that when he first got there, he was telling people like, we have to mention the word slavery here. And now he's saying, now I'm telling people we still have to mention Thomas Jefferson, how like this idea of how we teach history, and like there's a lot of criticisms, there's a lot of opinions about it. And my stance has been and will always be, you just teach all of it. You present, this is the what happened, and then how people interpret it and take it in, that's kind of that's their own responsibility. I'm not going to tell somebody what to think about it, but I left Monticello kind of thinking that. I had a colleague who said, I've been really struggling trying to teach this man, was he this or was he that? And I remember because it wasn't my turn to talk, and I just started yelling the word and. I was like, there's no or here. There's not usually a lot of ors in history. Someone can be this and that. And I feel like Monticello is the perfect example of the and in history. There's a lot of different stories that went on there, and they're all important, that you can't tell Monticello without Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
And you cannot tell Monticello without the enslaved people who built and worked and maintained those grounds. And there's a lot of other people who need to be included in that story as well. And it's always going to be an and, never an or. And that I believe that, but I heard it again, and that's what's sticking with me and is motivating me.
I'd say my answer is pretty similar. One thing that stood out to me was at the very beginning, we talked about having brave conversations. And I think that's something, today a lot of times we're afraid to do with, the cancel culture that exists in some places and legislation that exists in some places, that we're afraid to say talk about these stories and talk about, good and bad about people. We want to put people in boxes as good or bad. And so having those brave conversations is really important. I think students are desperate for that too. I think they can smell fake. And they can smell like when you're not being authentic. And so I think being willing to engage in those tough topics, be brave to talk about things that are good and bad, and have students do their own evaluation. I think that's one of the big things that I took out from the week at Monticello.
I forgot about that. I loved the distinction that was made between brave space and safe space, because I think people have been using that term safe space a lot. And you guys were adamant about, no, like not every place is safe. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to have discomfort in what we're talking about, but it's important to be brave and to speak what you're thinking. You should never be afraid to share your ideas, no matter what they are. And people need to learn how to accept that and be accepting that. Brave is different from safe. Safe kind of hinders people's ideas and makes it feel like they can't share and they can't be open.
It's a great way to start your school year, I think, with your kids.
Agreed.
And I think it's such an interesting concept when you talked about the concept of people holding those two ideas. And it's something that we talk so much about, of it's this and this. And this place, this person, these ideas, both are represented here. And people have a general understanding that humans are complicated, and humans are a large part of what makes up history, which means history is also going to be complicated, and it's going to be complex, and it's not necessarily going to be clear and concise and uniform when you add in all of the factors. So that's part of that information that we try to sort of share with our students, whether they're here visiting us, with you all in your classrooms, that it's challenging to think through all of that, and we sort of muddy up the story and then let them know that there are multiple conclusions for every different thing, depending on who you are and what your role is, or how you're engaging in that moment in history, in that space, in that place.
And Crystal, I think that's especially true with Thomas Jefferson, because he did write so much of what he did and what he thought, that like you can go to lots of different points in his writings and find two very different ideas from the same man. And so trying to evaluate, why is he saying this to this person and something different to somebody else? I think students, and I find that personally fascinating, I know students do as well, trying to come to terms with, all right, well, what really was his idea on this? And it's not always clear.
It's that like dichotomy we talked about of like ideal versus reality. Like I made a joke saying like, I know all the ways in which I'm supposed to eat healthy and I'm probably going to go buy that donut, even though I know like what I'm supposed to do. Sometimes, reality gets in the way, but yeah, it's a fascinating study. And also that like people's opinions can change over time. I feel like he wrote a lot about that, about how the next generation coming up he said something, and I'm not a scholar, so I can't quote it with the date, but he did say something, how the next generation comes up is going to have more wisdom than we had, just like we have more wisdom than the generation before ours. And we need to be willing to hear them out because they have a different experience and they're going to have a different perspective on the world. And so I feel like potentially he heard that and maybe, he shifted, he changed based on new information that he was seeking.
But that also brings up a really good point in thinking about these conversations you all are going to have in the coming school year. How do you plan to take what you've learned during your time at the Monticello Teachers Institute and use it in your classrooms?
Well, for me, I kind of mentioned earlier, the issue of church and state isn't going anywhere. And teaching government, I really want students to wrestle with that issue of where do we draw that line between religion and state, and in so many different areas, whether that be in school or economics or government policy. What is the proper relationship between those two really important things for so many people? And so I really want students to look at the court cases that have cited Jefferson and those that have argued against Jefferson. And ultimately, I want them to kind of be able to make their own decision, because one day they're going to be voters. They're going to be voting for people who are going to be making policy choices for our community, and those questions are not going to go away. And so I want them, as they're answering those questions for themselves, to not be doing it based on what they heard from somebody else, but from what they've learned from their own research and their own time wrestling with that question.
I want my kids to understand the concept of the brave space, because I really want to expand the idea of being able to openly talk and discuss. And sometimes, like we talked about the week we were there, leaning into something that's uncomfortable. And, that helps kids learn. It helps them grow. It helps them think critically. And that's what I took so many things away and learned so much, that I have so many things I want to impart on them. So I feel comfortable and confident going back into my classroom, because I think I can take on some of those difficult conversations and feel okay about it. And I think that's what I want for them more than anything, is to be able to talk and understand that it's not just dates and times and people, but there's so much more to it. And there's so many more contributors to the successes of, what happened at Monticello.
Mm-hmm. I echo that as well. And then the one thing, I developed a couple of projects while I was there because I got very into it. But one of the things I developed was a unit on civic engagement and the roles and responsibilities of citizens. And I feel like we're starting to get, at least I teach 8th grade history, and like they can kind of have that lack of connection or disengagement. Why does my vote matter? Why do I have to pay attention? And so I did a unit on that, using a lot of his words about the power of an educated group of people making decisions. And so I'm hoping to get them engaged and to know it doesn't just mean voting. Like they're going to have an option of like, do you even know who the mayor of your city is? Like, do you know who your representatives are? So I'm giving them a civic engagement project that, we'll use his documents, little Madison too, to kind of see what their vision was for like, to really have a government that is like representative of the people. The people need to be involved. They are not just there to be governed. And so I'm hoping to get them to engage and realize that like they matter, they make a difference, and it doesn't run without their participation. So I'm hoping to kind of give that to my 8th graders as they exit into high school. And like you said, become decision makers for the future. Like the next generation will be wiser if they engage and use their experience to help people understand like the needs of our society.
Absolutely. And that's definitely something that Jefferson said and purported with education. So So turning to other teachers, what is something you'd like other teachers to know about MTI or in your experience here?
I'll start. To me, it was It was really life changing. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but to me, it was. The time and the care and the detail that your staff put into these programs is exceptional. I have sat in so many professional developments and so many in-services, and I don't think I've ever quite walked away feeling the way that I did when I left Charlottesville. I just know that, I would challenge anyone to find something that was comparable to this, that you are really getting something that you can use and that you had so much help and input and so much inspiration, Stephen, like you said, from being with other people and listening and learning from them. I mean, that was just invaluable to me. So to me, it was life-changing. That would be what I would tell other teachers.
I would say similar to what I'm talking to my students about engaging. This is not a place where you can just sit and try to absorb information and be like, okay, like you are actively doing and thinking and collaborating. It is an active professional development that you need to participate in if you're going to get something out of it. And I mean, everyone did, and I'm sure everyone in your week did as well, but it's not like you're going to sit and have information just, put into your head, do with it what you will. It's actually people asking, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to tweak it? How are you going to implement it? How could it go? How could another teacher that's not you take this resource and put it into their school? So there's this, like, it's practical and it's something you're going to use. It's not theory. You're actually asked to create something that can be used by you and somebody else. And so you can't just go and think you're going to get a week in Virginia. You're going to get an experience of doing something important.
Right.
I think my thoughts would kind of echo Kirsten. So much of the professional development that teachers get, a lot of times you're not treated as a professional. You're kind of treated like somebody they've got to, cram some stuff into, or like you're not smart enough to handle these things. They're going to stand over you and tell you exactly how to do every step of the process. And MTI was not like that. So they professional in terms of how they interact with you and then how they guide your work. So they're not there to tell you specifically do these 6 things or you're not going to get your credit for the week. They want you to be able to build things that are going to be useful for you in your classroom. So I think all of us have sat in PDs before where you're like, I'm never going to use this. This does not apply at all to being my subject. But that was not the case for MTI. I felt like everything I was doing was something like, all right, I understand how I can take this back to my classroom and make it actionable.
And that's always what we want to hear. And I know each one of you has heard each one of us who are here hosting and collaborating with you say, all right, now we know how you're going to use it. Think about all the other educators who don't have the opportunity to be here right now, who are really sort of leaning on the knowledge that you're absorbing and the resources that you're creating. Think about the ways that this can also be useful to them if their classroom structure is different. And we always talk about that this is a collaborative space. And yes, all of you all have things that you're taking away from us and our colleagues and all of the scholars and scholarship that exist here, but you are our classroom experts. You are our teacher experts. So you know how your schools function, your districts, your communities, the students who you spend the year with. And so we rely on you to also inform us. And we spend a lot of time asking you questions.
We do.
Picking your brains about how we can also create resources that are beneficial for you all and your colleagues and your cohorts and for your students, because all of us, even though we're in different spaces, are all sort of operating towards the same shared goal, to make sure that we're educating students and helping them understand the complexity of history and really enhancing those critical thinking skills and helping them understand how the past has impacted the world that they're in today.
Absolutely. Well, that's about all the time that we have today. I do want to give a quick shout out to our other colleagues. Crystal and I co-lead the program, but we have some other great staff members here. Laura Cooper, our continuing education manager, Sheridan Carnes, who's an intern, and Carrie Curtis, who is a Monticello guide who helped to make this program as well run as it was this week. We really have a great group of people here, so I want to give them a shout out as well. But I also just want to end by saying thank you to your teachers. I mean, you are really doing the work all year long. We get you for a week, but then you turn around in your classrooms and are teaching and changing those minds all year long. So I want to personally thank you. I mean, I know this feels like a love fest right now, and it is, and I'm happy about that because I learned so much from you all the weeks that you were here, and really appreciated all that you gave to the program. So I'll just give you a thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the
Thanks.
opportunity. Yeah.
And for those who, teachers that are watching that may want to apply, we will be doing our Monticello Teacher Institute next summer. It usually takes place in July over 1 week. There are 2 different sessions. It is basically fully funded. So we pay for lodging, travel, meals, and the opportunities that you get here on site. So stay tuned on our website later this fall. The application will go live, and tell all your teacher friends and become a Monticello Teacher Ambassador.
And you can go on a live stream with us.
Exactly. Then you can be on here next year. Anything else, Crystal, that you wanted to throw in?
No, a huge thank you to you all for all of the insight that you gave us as well. We know that this is a shared continued work. It's not always easy work, but it's great work that all of us are doing in our respective spaces. And as Mel mentioned in the beginning, it's always inspirational for us as well as we go into the school year to hear from you all and spend that time really deeply engaging in the conversations and diving into the resources and getting to do the work of making sure that as we go into the school years, if you all do bring your students, whether it's virtually through our live virtual tours or our electronic field trips, or in person for our educational programs and our extended programs and guided experiences, that we're creating resources and conversations that students can really tap into and that teachers feel confident using in their classrooms and in those spaces. So thank you all for all that you've sort of done with us in the weeks that you were here.
With us. That's exactly right. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank
and thank
you.
you for joining
Thank you.
Online with our Monticello live stream. Join us next week for another live stream here at Monticello. Bye.